And a happy springtime to all my colleagues. It's really nice to see that sun shining, isn't it? My name is Michael Rainville. I'm the chair of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, and I'm going to call to order our regular meeting for Tuesday, April 11th. I'll now have the clerk call the roll, please.
Councilmember Payne.
Present.
Councilmember Wansley is absent. Vito.
Present.
Ellison.
Here.
Osmond is absent. Goodman.
Present.
Jenkins is absent. Chavez.
Present.
Urte.
Present.
Koski.
Present.
Palmisano is absent. Chair Johnson is absent. Chair Rainville.
Present.
We have 8 present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. We have one item today, which is a presentation by our IGR team on federal and state actions affecting the city of Minneapolis. I'll now invite Katie Toplinka, our IGR director, to introduce her team and begin this presentation.
Thank you, Chair Rainville and council members. Again, I'm Katie Topinka, Director of IGR, and we're happy to be here to provide an update for you today on what is happening at the state legislature, and excited to have much of our team here today to assist with the presentation. We have Indiria Falana and Steve Huser, 2 of our government relations representatives, and Chloe Walwork, who's our seasonal legislative aide, and we're each going to share a part of this presentation. The legislature is just returning from a break today, which is partly why we're all able to be here. They're kind of easing back into things. And prior to the break, they did a lot of work on budget bills separately in the House and Senate, and they will be bringing those together over the next 6 weeks. So we are going to provide updates on those budget bills and budget targets. Before we get into that, I'll just provide a couple of other updates on where things stand. There have been about 3,200 bills introduced in both the House and Senate as of last week before they went on break. There are 23 bills that have been passed by both chambers, and it highlights since we last presented to you on some of the things that have passed. There is the catalytic converter bill, which is aimed at adding more requirements for scrap metal dealers that buy the products, and adding criminal penalties for illegal possession of catalytic converters, trying to reduce the number of thefts. The House and Senate also passed the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, which is adds and strengthens protections aimed at keeping Native American children within the foster care system in Native American families. Both bodies also passed free school lunch and breakfast for all Minnesota students. They passed $50 million in family homeless prevention and assistance funds, which are funds that will be administered by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency for emergency rental assistance. And then they also passed funding to help ensure that eligible Minnesotans can keep their health insurance through MA and Minnesota Care. Before we get into budget bill updates, we just wanted to also update on a couple of the policy bills that we've been regularly updating you on when we're here to present. So the state and local government committees in both the House and Senate have omnibus policy bills. The bill to repeal the statute that established the Municipal Building Commission is in both of those bills. And so at some point there will be a conference committee, and we anticipate that will continue to move forward. Another provision that's included in both the House and Senate state and local government bills is the compensation cap, repealing the local official compensation cap. On the transportation side, our micro-mobility signage bill is moving, and if you do have detailed questions about that, Steve Huser can help address those. He's been pushing that along, but that is legislation that expands exceptions for advertisement in right-of-way areas to include micromobility facilities. So this would allow the city to create centralized locations and decide where the locations can be to charge things like electric scooters or electric bikes, so that they're not left in the right-of-way or places they shouldn't be. We did work on a bill related to traffic enforcement cameras. That bill is not moving right now, but there is a provision in the House and Senate transportation budget bills that would allow for a study around traffic enforcement cameras, and we do have authors for the bills and have been talking with the committee chairs and anticipate continuing to work on that next session. And then the last policy bill I was planning to highlight was the renter protection omnibus bills. We did talk about that at our last presentation. Both of those bills have moved through committees in the House and Senate and are awaiting action on the floor. And the provisions that are included in the renter protection omnibus are prohibiting rental discrimination based on somebody being having rental assistance. There's some provisions related to pets. There's requirements for landlords to disclose fees and forbid certain fees. There is a provision around providing a notice for eviction for non-payment of rent. And there also establishes a right to counsel for residents of public housing who are facing eviction. And then there's also some rules around restricting access. A property owner must give 24 hours notice before entering a rental unit. So those are some of the provisions included in that renter protection omnibus. We do expect that to see some action on the House and Senate floors in the weeks ahead. So now moving on to budget. In March, the joint budget targets were released. So these are targets that the governor and House and Senate leadership all agreed to. And that is noteworthy because in recent years, at least, we have typically seen that happen in May, very late in session. It's usually the House has targets, the Senate has targets, the governor has his budget. They each do their work, and then they reach joint targets later in session. So I think that is a sign that there will, agreements will come together, maybe not earlier, but maybe in a little more smoothly than they have in recent years, because they've already reached these joint targets. So just as a reminder, the state's budget is about a $65 billion budget. We do have a $17.5 billion budget surplus currently. The targets are what they agreed to, how to spend that surplus. And so the targets have a $17.8 billion general fund impact. That's because under taxes, aids, and credits, it's actually $3 billion. It's a $3 billion target, but some of that is aids and credits, so that 0.3 difference is on the aids and credits side. So that's why the general fund impact is higher than the total of the surplus. The next highest target is debt service and capital projects, so a capital investment bill, hopefully. Then K-12 education and human services, and those two areas also have the largest ongoing targets. A lot of these other areas, like transportation and housing, which both have billion-dollar targets, that's a lot of one-time spending because a lot of the surplus is one-time money. So this is sort of the largest targets that are represented on this slide. And again, those joint targets were agreed to, and that's what the committee chairs then are working off of as they're putting together their budget bills. And so now we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what's in some of the House and Senate budget bills. And so I'm going to start with economic development, and then I'll hand it off to Indiria to talk about housing. So in the economic development bills, one of the big priorities for the city, of course, has been economic recovery, particularly in the cultural corridors in our community that were most impacted by the civil unrest after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. So both the House and Senate bills do have significant funding for economic recovery. They go about it in slightly different ways, and then these differences will be worked out in a conference committee. So the House bill has $62.9 million over the next 2 years for what they have called the Empowering Enterprise Program. And the Empowering Enterprise Program will serve organizations that will create local economic relief programs designed with the primary goal of assisting communities adversely affected by the civil unrest, and also supporting the existing entities in those locations and encouraging new entities to locate in these areas. And the programs need to include outreach to cultural communities and support for micro enterprises. So within that $62.9 million that the House has designated for empowering enterprise, $31 million each year is a direct appropriation to the city of Minneapolis. So that money would come to the city, and our community planning and economic development department would work with local businesses to get this money out the door to them to support them in their recovery. On the Senate side, the economic recovery is addressed through what they're calling the Promise Act, through grants and loans through the Promise Act. The Promise Act, the acronym stands for Providing Resources, Opportunity, and Maximizing Investments in Striving Entrepreneurs. So it would be $50 million each year that would be distributed through Department of Employment and Economic Development at the state. And the grants and loans would be distributed through partner organizations. So some of those partner organizations include the Initiative Foundations in Greater Minnesota and NDC in the metro area. Also, and then the loans would be distributed through META. And I'm completely forgetting what META stands for right at the moment. But I will look it up and tell you if anyone is not familiar with META. But that's how that money will be distributed through communities under the Senate bill. So again, both significant amounts of funding for economic recovery, slightly different amounts and slightly different approaches, and those differences will be worked out through a conference committee. Of course, it is on the city's legislative agenda that we are seeking a direct appropriation to the city for economic recovery efforts, so we will be advocating for what's in the House bill as we talk with committee members going into conference committee, but certainly money for economic recovery in the city is the overarching goal. A couple of other provisions in the economic development bill that we know are of interest to all of you. One is establishing an Office of Child Care Community Partnerships. The purpose of the office is to support child care businesses within the state in order to increase the quantity of child care available and improve accessibility to child care for underserved communities. And that is in both the House and Senate bill. In the Senate bill, there's also the creation of the Office of New Americans. That's something that's on the city's legislative agenda and that we have been actively supporting. And the Office of New Americans would exist within DEED, and the goal would be to coordinate resources and help new Americans who are coming to Minnesota access jobs and opportunities here in Minnesota. So with that, I can pause and see if there are any questions specifically about the economic development provisions, but we will move on to housing next, and Adiria presenting.
I don't see any questions. I do have one. Are they going to save any money of the surplus? Is there a rainy day fund contribution?
Chair Rainville, it's a good question. I mean, the state does have a reserve, and MMB typically, that is part of the budgeting process, that there is typically money in the reserve. But I don't know the details of that and if they're designating any of the surplus to the reserve, but I can get back to you on that to confirm.
Tell them to save a little bit.
Okay.
And one other question, how are we doing with the U.S. Bank Stadium mortgage payment?
Yes, that's a good question, Chair Rainville and council members. So the budget targets do account for repaying the bonds on U.S. Bank Stadium. There's still a lot of details left to be determined. There are a couple of different bills moving, some that address the city's debt service obligations and some that, meaning that if the bonds are paid off, the city would no longer have to make those debt service payments. Other bills don't take that approach. So if the bonds were paid off, the city would still be paying the state on some of those debt service obligations. So our understanding is that this is going to be a provision in the tax bill, or likely to be a provision in the tax bill. And so there are still additional negotiations to come around sort of the outcome of U.S. Bank Stadium and what it means for Minneapolis. But it is addressed in the targets, and that there is a line item that would be the repayment of those bonds.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I'd like to reflect that we've had Councilmember Osmond join us and Councilmember Palmisano. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Director Tablinka.
Good morning, everybody. Chair, council members, good morning. My name is Indira Falana. I'm the newest government relations representative. As Director Tablinka already mentioned, I will be presenting just a few different highlights in the Housing Omnibus Budget Bill. So the first program is the Community Stabilization Program. The purpose of this program is to provide grants or loans for the preservation of NOAA, or naturally occurring affordable housing, through acquisition and rehabilitation. In the House proposal, this is being funded at $150 million, and in the Senate proposal, it's being funded at $100 million. And in that Senate proposal, $30 million is going to be directly allocated to the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. The next program is rental assistance. So this program is called the Family Homelessness Prevention and Assistance Program, and is run by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. Dr. Topinka already mentioned that $50 million has been appropriated from the legislature to go into this fund for emergency assistance. So in the House proposal, $100 million of funding is being allocated for this program, with $24 million being ongoing. In the Senate, it's $131 million, with $20 million of that being ongoing. So funds for this program provide supportive and financial assistance to families, youth, and individuals experiencing homelessness or are at risk of being homelessness. And then direct financial assistance may include covering rent, utility payments, or other housing costs. The Down Payment Assistance Fund is a pilot program that would create a first-generation home buyers assistance fund to provide down payment assistance. So for eligible home buyers, they will be eligible for up to $32,000 in a forgivable loan. The House proposal appropriates $150 million to this program, with the Senate appropriating $125 billion. Housing infrastructure bonds are issued through our state's housing finance agency, and the funds are used for new construction, acquisition, or rehabilitation of permanent rental housing. The House proposal is appropriating $200 million in funding in cash for these bonds. In the Senate, it is $100 million. Our emergency shelter funding is not in our housing budget, but I do want to highlight it. It is in our Health and Human Services, our HHS budget, and this funding is to ensure that we have continued 24/7 operations and services for Avivo Village, as well as American Indian Community Development Corporation's Homeward Bound Shelter. The next program is our high-rise sprinkler grant program. This is actually in both bills at the same amount, so for $10 million in funding in both the House and Senate, so in both bills. So this program would be run by our state's housing finance agency in order to fund. Thank you. This program will be run by our Minnesota Housing Finance Agency in order to fund sprinkler installation in buildings with housing units located at least 75 feet above fire department vehicle access. And then in both proposals, in both of these bills, $4 million is directly appropriated for the installation of sprinkler systems at Seward Tower West and Seward Tower East. The next program is a Lead Safe Homes Grant Program. This also would be run by our Housing Finance Agency in the state. And this is to assess and mitigate lead hazards in rental housing. This is for properties built before 1978. And the grants would be used for lead testing and risk assessments. Both proposals have this at $5 million. So next, on to environment. The Minnesota Relief Program is a program that was established by the Department of Resources in order to encourage the planting, maintenance, and improvement of trees in communities across the state. We're also hoping that this funding can be used to ease the burden of the cost for homeowners when it comes to removing infected ash trees. So the House provides $21 million in funding for this program, and the Senate provides $18 million for this program in funding. The Emerald Ash Borer, also known as EAB Response Grant Program, is in response to the invasive plant pest known as the Emerald Ash Borer that is killing all ash trees across the state. The funding for this program would be used to properly transport, process, and dispose of wood waste containing ash tree material. This program is not included in the Senate Omnibus bill, but the House does provide $37 million in funding for this program. PFAS, I'm not even going to begin to pretend to know how to pronounce that acronym, but there's a proposal in both the House and Senate that would ban the use, prohibit the use of intentionally added PFAS in a variety of products that we use every day. So PFAS is known to be a dangerous forever chemical that's found in many of the products, again, that we use daily, such as cosmetics, furniture. This PFAS ban would apply to even more than I'm mentioning now, such as cookware, dental floss, and there is $2.2 million in both bills in funding for that ban. The next provisions that I'm going to talk about here are only in the House. So this is...
Mr. Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, all good. I just had one question, if I
Please.
could. Wanted to go back to the Emerald Ash Borer funding. I do know that for some of the mitigation that's happening at the park level, that cost is being passed on to homeowners or landowners. And at least anecdotally, we're getting reports or hearing feedback that folks are being displaced by those costs. Do you know if the state funding is also going to be sort of passed on to the folks who are having these trees removed, or are they doing the mitigation sort of like without burdening the person who might have an ash tree in their yard or whatever? If we happen to know the answers to those questions.
Yes, Chair Rainville, Councilmember Allison. Yes, so the EAB Response Grant Program is one attempt at absorbing those costs from the homeowners. And then also the Minnesota Relief Program is also another attempt at absorbing those costs for homeowners. So with the relief program, we are hoping that this funding can be used to ease the cost of the burden for homeowners.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes. Thank you. So next, again, so these provisions are only in the House, not in the Senate. So the disposition of settlement money. This proposal states that whenever MPCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, recovers more than $250,000 from litigation or settlement agreement regarding a permit violation, 40% of the money must be transferred to the Community Health Board or local public health agency in the area where residents may have been exposed to the pollution that was the subject of litigation or settlement. So our city is an example of this because in the past we've received funds from a settlement. This was between MPCA and Northern Metals Recycling. Next, cumulative impacts. This is an environmental justice proposal, and it requires a cumulative environmental impact analysis to be conducted for certain permit decisions that may affect an environmental justice area, and it requires the MPCA commissioner to deny a permit application if the analysis shows that issuing it would contribute to cumulative adverse environmental stresses in the area. And there is $18.7 million in funding for this proposal, again, only in the House. And the community air monitoring is another environmental justice proposal, and it establishes a pilot program in the Pollution Control Agency, MPCA, to award grants to nonprofit organizations located in the environmental justice areas, partnering with organizations having technical experience deploying air monitoring networks to measure the level of air pollutants in multiple neighborhood locations, including mobile and sensor-based handheld devices. Funding priority is given to proposed projects in neighborhoods whose residents experience high rates of illness associated with exposure to air pollution, and there's $5 million in funding for that proposal. And next, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Stephen Huser, to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So I've got the transportation budget bills to go over for you. So both at a high level, the Senate and House bills roughly match up in terms of total spending. So in 2024, there are $4.2 billion being spent in both bills and $3.8 billion in 2025 in the Senate bill, $3.7 billion in 2025 in the House bill. I'm going to go over some kind of high-level, most pertinent provisions related to the city and city finances related to transportation infrastructure. So this is not an exhaustive list of all that are in these bills. MSA, the municipal state aid streets system funding, there's an increase in that state funding in both bills. There's a higher increase in the transportation budget for the Senate. In total, there are $248 million for MSA in 2024 and $278 million in 2025 in the Senate, and then 236 and 271 in the House bills, respectively. So the MSA program is for up to 20% of a city's designated street system. And so this is relevant because of the Large Cities Assistance Account that I'll reference later on in the presentation. So both bills are looking at new revenues, new state and regional revenues for transportation. Both of the Senate and House bills are contemplating a metro regional sales tax. This would be a point, I think both bills have a 0.75% regional tax, and that money would go to 5/6 of the money would go to transit for the region in both bills. 1/6 of the money in the Senate bill will go to the CASA, or the County State Aid Highway Formula money, while the House takes an approach of giving that 1/6 of the money to the Transportation Advisory Board, or TAB, to be distributed for highway improvement, safety, or active transportation. I will note that the city of Minneapolis does have a seat on the TAB, as do 8 other cities in the region. The other new revenue being contemplated by both bills is a 75-cent delivery fee. So this would be on goods that are delivered to your homes. They have to already be able to be taxed. So clothing would not qualify as something that would be taxed for this delivery fee. And that money would go to, a part of that money in the Senate bill goes to the Large Cities Assistance Account. This is now it would be a new account that would be created in statute that cities over 5,000 would be able to use on their non-MSA portions of their street system. So if a city has up to 20% on MSA, the Large Cities Assistance Account funding would be able to be used on the other 80% of a city's street system. That could be used for things like a pavement improvement program or things like that, hopefully if these are dedicated and ongoing funds, cities can contemplate how to program that money into their city budget. On the Senate side, a portion of that money goes into a transportation advancement account, which is new, and then a portion of that money also goes into MSA and boosting those funds. Both bills also contemplate a change to the registration tab fee schedule. So they're going to be they are similar tweaks, but I don't think they're quite identical. But what they're doing is they're changing the depreciation schedule for your vehicles when you register them with the state in terms of the age of the car. So they're slowing that down so that you'll if you have a newer car, you'll pay a higher registration fee amount for 1 or 2 years longer than you would otherwise. And then parts of that money are directed towards the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund, which MSA comes from, and other areas. And I think, Mr. Chair, it might be a good chance to pause because the revenue raisers are probably the most controversial parts of the transportation bill. So if there are any council questions, I can pause at this moment.
Thank you, Mr. Hooser. Any questions at all? No, I see none, so please go forward. Well, actually, I have a question.
Sure.
You gave me a really good explanation on the camera bill, and could you maybe share that with us? Short version.
Absolutely. So the city had a proposal to the legislature that would have asked for broad authority to set up a camera program for speed enforcement and red lights. We drafted an amendment to our original bill to include a red light program as well. We had good conversations with our authors and the chairs of the committee. At the time, we were looking at having some committee work done on that bill. It did start to look like there was a lot more questions that we were getting and some pushback in terms of concern about how that could be implemented. The chairs of the transportation committees, said maybe we can do a little bit more work for next session. So I think for this session, we've made some progress in changing the language, making sure we were working with those who had concerns with our legislation to try and alleviate that through the bill language or just a simple explanation of what we have in mind in terms of implementing it in the city. So I do think we're well positioned for next session to hit the ground running right away when they reconvene early next year.
Thank you. And I see no other questions. Please proceed. Oh, I'm sorry.
Chair and Mr. Hauser, I guess my question, the new revenues, are any of them being dedicated to transit?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Jenkins, so the Metro Region Sales Tax, 5/6 of that money is dedicated to the metro area transit system. So nearly all, with the exception of that 1/6, will go to transit.
Okay. But the other two revenue generators are for road repair.
That it would be my understanding, yes, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Jenkins.
All right, thank you.
All right, and so it's a good segue into a transit provision that's in both bills. So transit safety has been a topic of conversation from the beginning of session in both chambers related to the transit system. So both bills include a TRIP program or a transit rider investment program. What this program would do is it would fund work to improve safety on the transit system through what other metro regions have called an ambassador program. So it's contemplating making some changes, creating a rider safety, forgetting the terms that they're using for it, but it's basically a rules of conduct for transit that these ambassadors then would enforce. It's not to supplant the Metro Transit Police that operate on the transit system, but it'd be a supplement to that to try and get at some of the lower level, non-criminal activities that make riding transit less enjoyable than it should be. Only the Senate bill includes the large cities assistance account that I mentioned earlier. I will say that we've had conversations with the House. On the House side, they are definitely open to that idea. There was a House bill that was heard in committee that would have used a portion of the 75-cent delivery fee to also fund that program, and I know that there is support amongst House members for that idea as well. Both transportation bills have contemplated the Met Council governance and changes to how the Met Council members are selected. On the House side, they are setting up a task force to then make recommendations to the legislature on those changes. And there's a similar committee or advisory council that is set up on the Senate side as well to do similar work. Most of the conversation around metropolitan governance has been around transit decisions and how the transit system operates, but it's important to remember that the Met Council also takes on some work for regional planning, the regional wastewater system, as well as they have some housing work that the Met Council does as well. So just something for the council to remember. And then both bodies also included Northern Lights Express funding. In the Senate bill, there's $50 million of one-time money included in that bill, and on the House side, it's $194 million. And I'll pause there, Mr. Chair. That's the end of my transportation presentation.
If the, can you go back one slide, please?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
The Met Council governance, are the conversations around electing those members? Do you know, or how is that conversation going?
Sure. Mr. Chair, Council President, there were bills that were considered and introduced this session that proposed to have an elected Met Council. Mm-hmm. Those were not included in this bill. I know on the Senate side, it's the Transportation Committee that had jurisdiction over that. That's why you're seeing it in these transportation bills. The Chair Dibble has been an advocate this session for that approach. However, the task forces and commissions that are being contemplated in these bills are merely asking those bodies to then consider that as part of what they look at. So it could be an elected council, it could be a commission of, a COG or a council of governance approach. It could be make no changes at all. So it's directing them to take a look at those approaches and include an elected council, but it doesn't specify what, if they're angling for a specific outcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, on to public safety. So I'll start with saying that, so both of the House and Senate public safety bills take more of a grant funding approach. And I don't have this listed on the slide, but just for your awareness, the governor, his public safety budget did include, and his supplemental budget included $550 million in aids to local governments for public safety. So currently we have not seen the tax bills in the House and Senate, so we don't know if those aids to cities and local governments are going to be included. But in the public safety bills, they have not been included so far. What is included is grant funding. So in the Senate side, there's $172 million included for the Office of Justice programs that are within the Department of Public Safety. These are programs that are currently in statute. The city has applied for grants from these programs in the past. On the House side, there is some funding for those, but there's also $175 million allocated for new grant programs. So on the House side, there's the Community Safety Violent Crime Reduction and Clearance Support Program. That is funded at $75 million. And then there is $100 million for the Community Crime and Violence Prevention Account. So these are very detailed programs, but they are meant to be, so the Violent Crime Reduction and Clearance Support Program would be more funding for law enforcement, case clearance approach, trying to get more money to police departments to do crime reduction activities, while the Community Crime and Violence Prevention Accounts is funding that would be for things similar that our behavior crisis response teams could potentially be, would be applicable to that, or our other crime prevention programs, so non-law enforcement crime prevention programs.
Excuse me, Mr. Arnold. I see we have a question from Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you may have started answering my question, because I was my general question was restrictions on those funds. Are they, I see the recruiting dollars set aside, the justice programs grants. Of these various allocations, which ones are restricted use, and then which ones would be more open for, like you're mentioning, behavioral crisis response or other alternatives? And we know that our police department has happened to operate with a surplus over the years, and so I'm really concerned about increasing dollars that are still restricted for uses that we currently have a surplus around.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Payne, so it's important to remember that, so these wouldn't be guaranteed monies to the city. We would have to apply through these grant programs in order to get them, and so there are restrictions in terms of if you are a successful grantee, you would have to, have your program fit within the criteria, as is in statute. But then there is, it does leave some of that discretion to DPS to determine. But as far as the questions that I have had of the chairs on those programs, we are likely to, some of the programming that we currently do at the city would be a good candidate for those grant programs. So yes, in terms of like the grant funding that would go to law enforcement compared to, violence intervention and things of that nature, they are different grant programs that then the city would have to make a decision about which to apply for.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there is also in both bills local government emergency management funding. In the Senate side, they have allocated $1.5 million, and on the House side, it's $2 million. That gets distributed evenly between the 87 counties, 11 tribal governments, and 4 cities of the first class. I'll take the lower dollar amount. So if the $1.5 million in the Senate bill were to be law, the city would receive approximately $14,000. So slightly more than that if the House position was adopted. So not nothing, but, you know, in terms of the scale of what our emergency management response would be, helpful, but not you know, overly helpful. There's also law enforcement recruitment being considered in both bills. $5 million for an intensive, comprehensive peace officer education training account. What this is setting up is something similar to a state program that is currently in law that the State Patrol uses. The idea behind this is to offer some financial incentives for those who already have a 2 or 4 year college degree to go back and make maybe a mid-career change, or do something a little bit different than maybe they'd anticipated, and have them get part of their school costs covered through this, and then also contemplates some funding for retention. So once they are hired by a police department, you know, there's money for them to stay on for a period of time within that agency to then get the rest of their money. My one estimate I have heard for this is that it could produce roughly 100 officers, and this would be statewide. So this would be something that if a city so chose, they could you know, try and recruit one of these new officers. I will say that the recruitment and retention issue has been something that the city has advocated and encouraged the legislature to contemplate this session.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Huser, if you know this, we already do this. It's one of our paths to become a police officer. Can you tell us how, and appreciate if you don't know, and I'd ask somebody in a different department, how this would, from what you just said, I wonder, is this something that that is about a new specific class of 100 people that then different cities could try and choose from, or would this supplement what we already do here in Minneapolis?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, it would supplement. So, you know, anything that we're doing, we could do in addition to this. So if we so chose to, this would be state-led, state-funded, you know, program that would hopefully get those mid-career type people who maybe have a, you know, different type of experience that could be applicable to law enforcement, to try and reduce the barriers that they might face to make that change. So for example, you know, someone who maybe has been teaching for 10 years decides, you know, maybe I want to try law enforcement. And they've got that skill, you know, managing people, managing kids, you know, maybe that's applicable. And they said, but for, you know, some paying for my ability to go and get this training, or help me pay for that training, I would do law enforcement, but I decide not to because that's too much of a barrier for me. I have a family. I don't have the time. This hopefully the idea is that it would lower that barrier so that those folks would then go back, take the time to get trained, do that intensive training program funded by the state, conducted by a local higher ed institution within the state, and then have those candidates that local law enforcement then could try to then hire and have come to their agency.
I think I understand. So we already do this today in Minneapolis, and I think what you're saying is this would be a different program that people could also go into that would have the same kind of benefits that we do in Minneapolis, which is to pay for this kind of training for mid-career switching. And I know some MPD officers that have done that, and exactly that. We're a teacher first. But this would just be another avenue into that process.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember, yeah, that's my understanding of it. It would be, you know, a similar approach to that the city is doing, and a similar approach that the state is already doing to try and recruit. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar to a state patrol program.
I see. All right, thank you.
So the next provision that is in both bills that is of interest to the city is the body camera policy update. The basics of this update to state law is that when there is a critical incident, there would be a 5 business day requirement for the footage, any body camera footage of that incident be shared with the deceased person's family next of kin, and a 14 business day clock for releasing any of that footage to the public. There would be exceptions that a chief law enforcement officer could make if it would impede an investigation or other good reason to not release. That would be taken into consideration as well. A house-only provision is a few provisions related to firearm and gun control. So there's provisions to require background checks for firearm purchases, provision to allow for extreme risk protection orders, and there's also a provision in the bill related to what constitutes a fully automatic or machine gun, and then changes the penalties for that, for the possession of that type of a weapon. Another house-only provision is the law enforcement hate group membership prohibition. So this is directing, statute would be then directing the post board to make it so that law enforcement personnel could not be a member or associated with a known hate group. And I think that is all I have for public safety.
Great. I see no other questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then I'll introduce Chloe Walwork to come up and talk about the elections update.
Welcome.
Hi, Chair Rainville and council members. Like Mr. Hughes said, I'm Chloe Walwork, seasonal legislative aide, and I'll just be going over some of the election updates that we're seeing in the legislature, and first being early voting. This is in both, proposed in both the House and Senate, and so this would, for voters, it would be very similar to if they were voting on Election Day, and this would start 18 days prior to Election Day. Voters would put their ballots directly into the tabulators at this point, and the absentee process would halt for in-person. Another proposal in both the House and Senate is prohibiting election official intimidation. This would ensure election officials, administrators, election judges are protected against intimidation or interference while performing their duties in the election process. This also prohibits obstructing election judge access to polling places, dissemination of personal information of election administrators, election judges, and also prohibits tampering with voter equipment. Also moving in both the House and Senate is automatic voter registration. This would allow individuals to be registered if they present information that is required to register to vote to certain state agencies, like the DMV. And so currently Minnesota has an opt-in system where if you go to the DMV, you can opt in to register to vote, but this would be more of an opt-out system. In both House and Senate, there is also an expansion of the time to drop off ballots on Election Day. Currently, drop-offs by either a voter or agent delivery, if a voter cannot drop off their own ballot, is only until 3 p.m. on Election Day, and this would expand it to be till 8 p.m. on Election Day when those polls are usually closed. In the Senate, specifically in their Finance Omnibus bill, they have included an establishment of a ranked choice voting and voter engagement advisory task force. So the job of this task force would be to assess the adoption of ranked choice voting, both locally and statewide. The House has a similar task force in an individual bill. This was not a part of their big omnibus bill. And this task force would have their final report submitted by 2025 with their assessment of ranked choice voting. Also included in both House and Senate omnibus bills are provisions about trainee election judges. And so this provision would close a gap currently in statute by allowing individuals who have graduated high school but are not yet 18 years old to still participate in the election process under a trainee election. In current statute, once you've graduated high school, you are no longer eligible to be a student election judge, and you cannot be a regular election judge until you are 18. So it just closes that gap, and we did have someone from the city testify in support of that provision. In both House and Senate, there are also provisions that would require post-secondary institutions to submit a student housing list if students enrolled accept state financial aid. This is something that Councilmember Wansley testified in support of, and so institutions would submit housing lists of students who live in the institution's housing or in the city or cities that the campus is situated in, if they have that information available. And so the idea would be to help students register to vote. So if a student is listed on one of these housing lists, they would just use that list and then their student ID to then register to vote. And then lastly, I just wanted to go over some of the funding opportunities for the city that are proposed in both House and Senate. So the House has the voter funds, and so this would appropriate a little over $1 million in 2024 and a little over $1 million in 2025. And this funding would be appropriated to counties and then to cities. And the voter funds can be used for any purpose directly related to election administration, including equipment, cybersecurity, local match for state or federal funds, or for staff costs for election judges. So the purpose just to try to ease the burden on local units of government who are putting on elections. And then the Senate has a couple of grant opportunities for the city. The first being a one-time appropriation of $210,000 for ranked choice voting education grants. So any local unit of government that has implemented ranked choice voting would qualify, and this can be used for a public education campaign on the use of ranked choice voting. And so the requirements of this grant would be to provide information citywide, but must focus on communities with language barriers, new voters, or low voter participation rates. And then the last grant is grants to improve polling place access for individuals with disabilities. And so this would be a one-time appropriation of $800,000. This money could go towards purchasing equipment or for making capital improvements on publicly owned facilities to, again, improve that access for individuals who are disabled. And that is all I have. I can answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Director Topinka.
I see no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you to the IGR team for their presentations. You can see everyone is tracking a lot of different information, and so just really appreciative for the work that they're doing to represent the city over at the Capitol. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few next steps of what to expect over the next 6 weeks. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the legislature is returning from break today, and the Senate Finance and House Ways and Means committees will be meeting to pass these omnibus budget bills that we were just talking about to the floor, and then the House and Senate will need to pass them on the floor and then bring the bills together to meet in conference committee. So all of that's going to take a few weeks. So we do expect conference committees to start meeting in late April or early May. The last day of session is May 22nd, so that is the day that they'll need to complete their work. And so I think it's going to maybe feel to us slightly slower over the next few weeks just because there aren't as many committees meeting and a lot of work is going to be being done on the floors, and then it'll be really fast and furious for a few weeks there in late April and early May as conference committees are meeting. You'll notice we did not provide any updates on the tax bills or capital investment bills today. Those we have not yet seen omnibus tax bills. There was a capital investment bill that passed on the House floor that included the Central City Stormwater Tunnel, did not pass on the Senate floor. So we're still kind of waiting to see what the path is going to be for capital investment over these next 6 weeks of session. So that concludes our update for today, and happy to take any final questions. Otherwise, we will be back in May with another update for all of you.
Thank you, and I see no other questions. So without further discussion, I'll ask the clerk to file this report. And with that, we've concluded all business to come before the committee today. Without objection, we are adjourned.